Warning. The following story is based on actual events. All names, character, and enginate are entirely incidental.
The Tequendama Falls Hotel. A place of echoing grief along the Bogota River, about 30 kilometers southwest of Colombia's capital, stands the abandoned Tequendama Falls Hotel. Built in 1923-1928 as a luxurious mansion hotel by renowned architect Carlos Arturo Topias. The elegant French-style building was meant to offer wealthy guests breathtaking views of the 57-meter Tequendama waterfall. For a brief time in the 1930s and 1940s, it was one of the most exclusive retreats in the country. The golden era did not last. By the late 1950s, the river below the falls had become heavily polluted by industrial and domestic waste from Bogota. The once crystal mist turned foul-smelling, guests stopped coming, and the hotel closed its doors in the early 1990s. For the next 2 decades, the abandoned building, perched dramatically on the cliff's edge, became associated with a much darker reputation. Over the years, numerous people, overwhelmed by personal crisis, chose the hotel's balconies and the rocks below as their final destination. Local police and rescue teams recovered dozens of bodies from the gorge. The combination of the dramatic drop, the isolation of the site, and the decaying grandeur of the hotel gave birth to its grim nickname, the Suicide Hotel, or Hotel of the Leap. Long before the mansion existed, the same cliffs carried spiritual weight for the indigenous Muisca people. When Spanish conquistadors began their violent conquest in the 16th century, some Muisca reportedly leapt from the waterfall rather than face enslavement or forced conversion. Muisca oral tradition speaks of the falls as a sacred threshold where souls could transform into eagles and fly to freedom, an act of spiritual liberation rather than simple despair. Many Colombians believe the echoes of those ancient leaps still linger in the mist. In the 1990s and early 2000s, paranormal investigators and urban explorers visited the abandoned hotel and reported cold spots, disembodied voices, footsteps in empty corridors, and sudden overwhelming feelings of sadness. Some claim to see shadowy figures standing on balconies or fleeting silhouettes near the waterfall at night. In 2011, after years of neglect, the building was rescued from total ruin. The Colombian government, together with the Ecological Farm Foundation of Porvenir and the French-Colombian Institute, André Malraux, carried out an extensive restoration. In 2018, the former hotel reopened, not as accommodation, but as the Tequendama Falls Museum of Biodiversity and Culture. The exhibits now focus on the ecology of the Bogota River, whose water quality has greatly improved thanks to new treatment plants, Muisca cosmology, and the geological history of the waterfall. Yet even as a museum, the site has not entirely shed its melancholy aura. Guards and visitors occasionally report hearing faint cries carried on the wind or feeling watched from the upper floors. The panoramic windows that once framed romantic sunsets now frame exhibits about extinction, pollution, and cultural loss, topics that unintentionally echo the building's sorrowful past. today, the Tequendama Falls Hotel stands as a strange monument, part ecological beacon, part memorial to human despair, and part reminder of the Muisca belief that sometimes a leap can be an act of transcendence rather than surrender. The roar of the waterfall continues, indifferent to whether the souls passing through its mist are fleeing conquistadors, broken-hearted lovers, or simply curious tourists chasing ghosts.
The Elsa doll that refused to stay gone. In December 2013, 6-year-old Madeline Madonia of Houston, Texas, received the perfect Christmas gift. A singing Elsa doll from Disney's Frozen like thousands of others. The doll spoke and sang "Let It Go" in English whenever the snowflake pendant on her necklace was pressed. For the first 2 years, everything was normal. Then, in early 2015, the doll began switching languages on its own. One moment it sang in English, the next in Spanish. No language button, no warning. The family never replaced the original batteries, yet the voice grew clear and louder. Even when the on-off switch under Elsa's dress was flipped to off, the doll would suddenly burst into song in the middle of the night, waking the children. By 2019, Emily Madonia, Madeline's mother, had had enough. In December, she tossed the doll into the outdoor trash bin. 2 weeks later, the family discovered Elsa sitting upright inside a wooden storage bench in the living room. The children swore they hadn't retrieved it, and the garbage had already been collected twice. From that day forward, the doll stopped singing in English entirely. Every phrase was now in Spanish. Convinced they were dealing with something unnatural, the Madonias double-bagged the doll, buried it at the bottom of the trash can, and watched the truck haul it away. They left for a short Christmas vacation. When they returned, Elsa was waiting for them on the back porch, clean, dry, and still double-bagged. At this point, Emily contacted local news station KPRC2. In January 2020, the station ran a segment that quickly went viral, desperate for a permanent solution. The family mailed the doll to a friend, a longtime family friend in Minnesota. He received the package, duct-taped Elsa to the front bumper of his Jeep as a joke, and drove her through the brutal Minnesota winter. As of the last public update in February 2020, the doll had not returned to Texas. However, the story didn't quite end there. In late 2021, Emily posted on Facebook that her mother, who still lives in the same Houston neighborhood, began hearing faint strains of "Let It Go" coming from the attic at night. No one in the house owns a Frozen doll anymore. Some followers of the saga jokingly asked whether the doll had simply teleported to the next closest family member. Paranormal investigators who later examined photos and videos of the doll pointed out several odd details. The pendant that activates the voice box shows unusual wear, as if it had been pressed thousands of times more than the family ever used it. And the batteries, when finally removed in 2020, were dated 2013 and showed no corrosion despite 7 years of constant use. Whether the Elsa doll was possessed, cursed, or simply the victim of a bizarre glitch that somehow survived being thrown away twice, it remains one of the strangest modern haunted object cases on record. As Emily Madonia told reporters, "We just wanted a normal toy for Christmas. Instead, we got a horror movie that won't end."
In the quiet farming town of Villisca, Iowa, a modest white 2-story frame house at 508 East 2nd Street has become one of America's most infamous paranormal landmarks. On the night of June 9-10, 1912, someone entered the home of Josiah and Sarah Moore, slipped past locked doors and methodically bludgeoned 8 people to death with the blunt side of an axe. The victims were Josiah,
43,
Sarah,
their 4 children, Herman, Catherine,
Boyd, and Paul,
and 2 young guests,
Ina and Lena,
Stillinger,
who were staying overnight. Every skull was crushed. The killer even covered mirrors and windows with sheets and clothing before vanishing into the night. The crime remains unsolved. Suspicion fell on traveling preacher George Kelly, a known drifter with a history of mental instability. But 2 trials ended in hung juries and an acquittal. Other suspects, a possible serial killer named Henry Lee Moore,
no relation,
hired hands, even a rumored traveling butcher, were investigated and cleared. The case is still officially open with the Iowa Department of Criminal Investigation. After standing empty for decades, the house was purchased in 1994 by Martha and Darwin Lynn. They painstakingly restored it to its exact 1912 appearance. No electricity in most rooms.
period furniture,
The same wallpaper patterns, even the Moore's original pantry door bearing axe marks. Since 1998, it has operated as a public tour site and overnight lodging. A night in the house currently costs $4.28 for up to 6 people. Guests sign waivers acknowledging they stay at their own risk. Countless visitors have reported classic hauntings. Children's laughter turning to cries, doors slamming by themselves, heavy footsteps on the stairs, cold spots, and the unmistakable silhouette of a tall man holding an axe in the upstairs hallway. EV recordings often capture whispers saying, "Go away," or children calling for their mother. Some guests wake to find objects moved or feel an oppressive weight on their chests. The darkest modern chapter occurred on November 14, 2014. Robert Stephen Lorson Jr., a 37-year-old paranormal enthusiast from Rhinelander, Wisconsin, was spending the night with friends. Around 12:45 a.m., almost exactly the hour the original murders began. His companions heard a commotion and discovered Lorson in one of the upstairs bedrooms with a deep self-inflicted stab wound to the chest. Emergency services rushed him first to a local hospital, and then by helicopter to Omaha. He survived and was released days later, but has never given a public explanation. The Montgomery County Sheriff ruled the injury self-inflicted and closed the case. Martha Lynn, who still owns and operates the house, was shaken by the incident. "We get publicity, but not the kind you want," she later said. "I don't want anyone thinking the house will possess them into hurting themselves." Despite the event, overnight bookings actually increased in the following years. Today, the Villisca Axe Murder House continues to draw thousands of visitors annually. By day, it's a somber crime scene museum. By night, it remains one of the few places in America where anyone can legally sleep in a location where 8 people were brutally murdered, and where, over a century later, something still seems unwilling to let them rest in peace. The house that was already insulated with death. In the spring of 2015, Greg and Heather Bretzius of Auburn, Pennsylvania, decided to make their 1930s home more energy efficient. When contractors began removing the old plaster and lath walls to install modern insulation, they found something far older and far stranger. Dozens of mummified animal carcasses deliberately packed into the walls and ceilings. Cats, chickens, small pigs, birds, even a dog, all carefully wrapped in yellowed newspapers from the Great Depression era. Alongside them lay half-empty jars of spices, handwritten charms on scraps of paper, and bundles of herbs tied with red string. The discovery made national headlines. The family shipped more than 300 artifacts to Dr. David Cribble, a folklorist and expert on Pennsylvania German.
Pennsylvania Dutch.
Powwow magic at Kutztown University. His verdict was unequivocal. The house had been hexed and protected by a series of powwow rituals, a centuries-old blend of pre-Christian Germanic folk healing and Lutheran mysticism brought to America by immigrants in the 17th and 18th centuries. Powwow is not witchcraft in the modern sense. It is a whispered tradition of spoken charms, Bible verses, and physical talismans meant to heal, protect, or occasionally curse. Most charms are benign, a spoken rhyme to stop bleeding, a circle drawn around a barn to keep lightning away, or a dried eel heart sewn into a child's coat to prevent nightmares. But the darker side exists. Practitioners, known as powwowers or hexenmeisters, were sometimes hired to place powerful protective wards inside the very bones of a house. In the Bretzius home, the animals were classic building sacrifices. Across Europe and early America, it was once common to immure living or freshly killed creatures in walls or under thresholds to guard against evil spirits, fire, and sickness. In Pennsylvania Dutch country, the practice lingered longer than almost anywhere else. The rap newspapers acted as both shroud and calendar, proving the ritual had been performed during the original construction or a major renovation in the late 1930s. Some of the charms found were harmless, a chicken wing and a page from the Gospel of John to bring peace to the household. Others were more unsettling. One contained a cat with its mouth sewn shut and a scrap of paper reading, so the evil cannot speak. Another held a small piglet wrapped with a lock of human hair, and the words, "As this dies, so dies the plague." The most disturbing was a desiccated puppy whose collar still bore a faded name tag, Fritz. A note tucked beneath it read, in old German script, "He will guard the family forever."
Dr. Kriebel explained that the animals were never meant to be found. Once sealed inside, their spirits were believed to become eternal sentinels.
Disturbing them was considered extremely dangerous. Within weeks of the discovery, the Bretzius family began experiencing headaches, respiratory issues, and a persistent stench of decay that no amount of cleaning could remove. Doctors diagnosed histoplasmosis, a lung infection caused by fungal spores released from the centuries-old remains. Heather told reporters the smell sometimes returned at night, strongest near the exact spots where the animals had been removed. The family kept a few artifacts in sealed boxes, but most were reburied in consecrated ground at a local Lutheran cemetery, following advice from a modern powwow practitioner who performed a quieting ritual to appease the disturbed spirits. Even so, visitors still report cold spots and the faint sound of scratching inside the walls. Today, the Bretzius house stands quiet, regulated with fiberglass and foam. Yet every so often, when the wind blows from the west, neighbors swear they catch a fleeting whiff of something old and sour, as if the walls themselves remember what they once held and are still trying to keep the family safe, or remind them never to forget.
The vanishing at the sizzle In January 2013, 21-year-old Elisa Lam, a Canadian student with bipolar disorder, arrived in Los Angeles on a solo West Coast trip. She posted daily on her Tumblr, our life in words, and checked in with her parents. On January 31, the call stopped. Security footage from the Cecil Hotel elevator shows her last known moments, pressing every button, hiding in the corner, gesturing and whispering to someone unseen, stepping in and out as the doors refuse to close. The 4-minute clip is equal parts heartbreaking and bewildering. The Cecil, a 1920s behemoth in Skid Row, had long been infamous night stalker. Richard Ramirez lived on the 14th floor in 1985. Austrian killer Jack Unterweger murdered 3 women there in 1991. Dozens of suicides and overdoses had occurred within its walls. For weeks, guests complained that the water ran black at first, then tasted sweet and disgusting. No one reported it. On February 19, a maintenance worker climbed to the roof and found Elisa's naked, decomposing body floating in one of the 4 rooftop water tanks. Her clothes and belongings were neatly folded nearby. The coroner ruled accidental drowning, citing a bipolar manic episode that caused psychotic behavior. Toxicology found only her prescribed medications, no drugs or alcohol. How she reached the alarmed, locked rooftop, climbed a 10-foot tank, and entered through a heavy hatch remains officially unexplained. The eerie elevator video went viral. Theories exploded. Murder, demonic possession, government experiment. Even parallels to the film Darkwater web sleuths harassed innocents for years. Netflix's 2021 series Crime Scene. The vanishing at the Cecil Hotel concluded that Elisa, off her meds and in full psychosis, hid in the tank herself, an agonizing but human tragedy in a building soaked in decades of despair. The hotel closed in 2017 and reopened in 2021 as low-income housing. Its name scrubbed of the past, Elisa's final blog post ends mid-sentence. Her parents still grieve in silence, asking only that people remember their daughter as the bright, curious girl she was, not the mystery she became.
Spring 1973, Enfield, Illinois. A sleepy railroad town of barely 600 souls, tucked between cornfields and forgotten coal mines in the flat, endless south of the state. On the evening of May 10, Henry McDaniel, a 47-year-old Korean War veteran who made his living selling magazine subscriptions door to door, was finishing supper with his wife, Betty, and their 2 youngest kids. Around 9:30 p.m., something began scratching at the storm door on the side of the house. A frantic, metallic rasping as though claws were trying to tear straight through the aluminum screen. Henry told the kids to stay inside, grabbed his .22 revolver and a flashlight, and stepped onto the small concrete porch. What he saw in the cone of light stopped his heart for a second. The thing stood just over 3 feet tall. Its body was squat and thick, the color of wet cement, glistening faintly as if coated in some kind of slime. Instead of 2 legs, it had 3, 2 stubby ones in front and a longer, spring-like 3rd leg at the rear that seemed to propel it in sudden, kangaroo-like hops. 2 tiny arms, little more than withered claws, dangled uselessly from its shoulders. But the eyes, those eyes were the worst, huge, perfectly round, glowing a vivid bubblegum pink, each one as wide as a coffee saucer. They reflected the flashlight beam like road reflectors and never blinked. The creature let out a sound that Henry later described as a cross between a baby crying and a wild cat screaming, then bounded away toward the abandoned L&N railroad tracks behind the house. It covered 30 feet in 3 impossible leaps and vanished into the weeds. Henry fired 4 shots after it. He swore the bullet struck something solid. He heard the dull thuds. But the thing never slowed. Half an hour later, White County Sheriff's Deputy Roy Possard Jr. and a state trooper arrived. They found the screen door shredded in 4 parallel gashes, too high and too deep for any dog. In the soft dirt near the tracks, they discovered a trail of prints, unlike anything they'd ever seen. Roughly dog-shaped, but each with 6 distinct toes, the middle 2 longer than the others, pressed deep as though the creature weighed far more than its size suggested. Word spread fast in a town that small. By the next night, curiosity seekers and armed locals were prowling the railroad embankment with shotguns and flashlights. On May 12, a young man named Rick Rainbow,
Yes, that was really his name.
claimed he and 4 friends cornered the thing near the same tracks. They said it hissed like a cornered alley cat, then leapt straight over a moving freight car and disappeared into a thicket on the far side. For the next 3 weeks that followed, Enfield became a circus. Radio stations from St. Louis to Evansville sent reporters. UFO investigators descended with tape recorders and Geiger counters. Someone even brought a cage and offered Henry 500s if he could trap it. Alive Henry turned him down. If they ever catch it, he told the Mount Vernon Register News, they're going to find out there's more than one. And they didn't come from anywhere on this earth. That I guarantee. Sightings continued into early June. Strange lights over the fields, more 6-toed tracks, livestock found dead with surgical precision wounds. Then, as suddenly as it began, everything stopped. No more scratches at doors, no more glowing pink eyes in the dark. 52 years later, the case remains officially unexplained. The Illinois State Police file is still open. The screen door with its 4 impossible claw marks is said to be stored in a back room of the White County Sheriff's Office, though no one will admit it publicly. And every spring, when the corn starts growing, and the nights turn warm and thick, old men on the porch of the Enfield General Store still lower their voices and tell teenagers the same warning Henry McDaniel gave in 1973. If you ever hear something scratching at your door after dark, don't open it. Just turn off the lights and pray it loses interest. Because whatever that thing was, it wasn't lost. It knew exactly where it was going.
A tragic cure. The death of Kennedy If. In the leafy suburb of Enfield, North London, the I family lived a comfortable life in their 3 million 7-bedroom home. Dr. Kenneth Ife, 64, was a successful business consultant and devout charismatic Christian. His wife, Josephine, 56, shared his deep faith. Their sons, Roy, Harry, Collins, and twins, Daniel and Samuel, were all marketed executives, active in the Jesus Sanctuary Ministries, a Southeast London church emphasizing spiritual warfare against demons. The family's religious devotion was profound, rooted in beliefs that evil spirits could invade the body and required prayer and restraint to expel. But on August 19, 2016, this faith turned deadly for their eldest son, 26-year-old Kennedy. Kennedy, a quiet marketing consultant, had been feeling unwell for days. That evening, he complained of a sharp throat pain that escalated into delirium. He became aggressive, biting his father's arm hard enough to draw blood and ranting about a python or snake writhing inside him. In a frantic moment, he threatened to mutilate himself, reaching into his shorts and declaring he'd cut off his own genitals. Terrified, the family locked away kitchen knives and barred him from his mother's bedroom. Instead of calling for medical help, Josephine consulted a church minister who advised prayer as the solution. Convinced Kennedy was possessed by a demon, the mark of the beast 666 from his teenage jokes manifesting as regret, they decided to cure him at home. Over the next 3 days, the Ives took turns restraining Kennedy in his upstairs bedroom. They used cable ties, ropes, and handcuffs to bind him to the bed frame, applying what Kenneth called overwhelming force in rotating shifts. The room became a makeshift prayer chamber. Family members chanted Bible verses, laid hands on him, and commanded the spirit to leave. Colin later told police. It's clear that thing was in him. It was clearly trying to kill him. They believed the aggression was supernatural, not a medical crisis like dehydration, sleep deprivation, or a possible infection. No food or water was offered. Kennedy's pleas for drink went unheeded as prayers intensified. By August 22, Kennedy was severely dehydrated, his breathing labored and shallow. At around 10 a.m., Brother Harry finally dialed 999, explaining his sibling was complaining of dehydration. Paramedics arrived to find the young man unresponsive, covered in over 60 wounds, bruises, abrasions, and a possible bite mark on his shoulder. From the restraints and struggles, he was pronounced dead at 10:17 a.m. from cardiac arrest due to the prolonged ordeal. As police entered, Colin knelt over the body, attempting a resurrection ritual, chanting, "Kennedy, I commend you to rise in the name of Jesus." While the family prayed fervently, the autopsy confirmed neglect. No underlying disease explained the possession claims, but the restraints caused fatal stress on his body. Kenneth, Josephine, and the 5 sons were arrested and charged with manslaughter, false imprisonment, and causing or allowing the death of a vulnerable adult. The trial at the Old Bailey, starting February 2019, lasted weeks. Prosecutors argued the family's false imprisonment kit, multiple cable tie packs, showed premeditated intent, ignoring clear signs of a medical emergency. Defense lawyers portrayed it as a tragic misjudgment born of sincere faith, not malice. Roy insisted it was a domestic issue, not life-threatening. After 4 days of deliberation, on March 14, 2019, the jury acquitted all 7. They accepted the family's testimony of genuine belief in demonic possession, influenced by their church ties, and ruled the restraint, though excessive, stemmed from panic rather than cruelty. The case exposed tensions between religious freedom and child safeguarding laws in the UK, sparking debates on faith healing and mandatory reporting for vulnerable adults. Jesus Sanctuary Ministries distanced itself, stating exorcisms should involve professionals. Years later, the Ives have largely faded from public view, but Kennedy's story endures as a cautionary tale. In a nation where charismatic Christianity grows, it reminds us that the line between spiritual salvation and fatal delusion can blur in the grip of fear. As Colin reflected post-trial, we thought we were saving him. Instead, their prayers silenced him forever.
The Watcher of 657 Boulevard. In June 2014, Derek and Maria Brothers closed on their dream house at 657 Boulevard in Westfield, New Jersey. A 6-bedroom century-old Dutch colonial they bought for $1 million. Just 3 days after signing the papers while they were renovating before moving in, the first letter arrived. Typed on plain white paper and mailed in a nondescript envelope. It was addressed in childish handwriting to the new owner. Inside, the writer welcomed them to the neighborhood and immediately introduced himself. My grandfather watched the house in the 1920s and my father watched in the 1960s. It is now my time. I am the watcher. I have been put in charge of watching and waiting for its second coming. The letter grew darker. The author claimed to know the couple had children and had seen the contractors coming and going. Then came the chilling questions. Do you know what lies within the walls of 657 Boulevard? Why are you here? I will find out. Have they started to bring the young blood you told me about? I am pleased to know your names now, and the name of the young blood you have brought to me. Over the next weeks and months, 3 more letters arrived, each more unhinged than the last. The watcher described watching the children play in the backyard, referred to them as young blood, and asked whether one of them had been spotted on the enclosed porch. Is she the artist in the family? The writer claimed the house had spoken to him, telling him it was thirsty and craved young blood. Terrified, the Broaddeuces never spent a single night in the house. They installed security cameras, hired private investigators, and alerted the Westfield police. Investigators discovered that several neighbors also received strange letters years earlier, though none as threatening. One previous owner admitted getting a similar note shortly before selling, but had dismissed it as a prank and never mentioned it during the sale. DNA on the envelopes pointed to a woman. Yet every led disgruntled neighbor's real estate rivals, a local eccentric who played video games in his mother's basement across the street. Went nowhere. A gaming acquaintance of the eccentrics even bore the online handle, The Watcher, but no hard evidence connected anyone to the letters. The Broaddeuces sued the previous owners, the Woods family, for failing to disclose the earlier letter. The case was dismissed. They tried to sell the house, but every potential buyer learned of the story. They offered to tear it down and subdivide the lot. The town's planning board denied permission after neighbors protested. Insurance refused to cover the loss. By 2019, after 5 years of legal battles and mounting costs, they finally sold 657 Boulevard for 19. After 5 years of legal battles and mounting costs, they finally sold 657 Boulevard for 19. After 5 years of legal battles and mounting costs. The new owners reportedly renovated extensively, installed new walls, and have lived there peacefully ever since. Yet every so often on quiet evenings, long-time residents walking their dogs past 657 Boulevard still glance up at the windows, half expecting to see someone watching back.
Echoes of the apocalypse. The Strack family's final days. On a crisp September afternoon in 2014, 19-year-old Jansen Strack pushed open the door to his family's modest brick home at 954 East 200 South in Springville, Utah, a quiet Mormon enclave of tidy lawns and minivans. He had been away at his girlfriend's house, but something felt wrong. The air was thick, silent. Upstairs in the master bedroom he found them. His father Benjamin,
Mother Christie,
and 3 younger brothers,
Benson,
Emery,
and Zion,
all dead, sprawled in a locked room reeking of vomit and chemicals. Jansen, Christie's son from a previous marriage, called 911 in shock. Autopsies later revealed a lethal cocktail. The boys and Christie from diphenhydramine,
Benadryl,
and methadone. Benjamin from heroin and overdose. It was a murder-suicide, but why? No note, no prior signs of despair. The community reeled. Friends described the Stracks as devoted parents, active in their LDS ward, with Benjamin coaching youth soccer and Christie volunteering at school. Springville police, led by Greg Finlayson, launched a probe that uncovered a chilling undercurrent. A notebook on the kitchen counter listed mundane tasks.
feed the pets,
Find house sitter, pack clothes, it mimicked vacation prep, but the family had no trip planned. Scattered papers hinted at deeper turmoil, scribbled Bible verses on end times, clippings about global unrest, and a dog-eared copy of John Krakauer's 2003 bestseller. under the banner of heaven. The book chronicled the Lafferty brothers, fundamentalist Mormons Ron
On death row.
and Dan,
Life sentence.
who in 1984 stabbed Ron's sister-in-law, Brenda, and her 15-month-old niece, Erica Ann, to death, claiming divine revelation. Ron, excommunicated for polygamy advocacy, believed God ordered the removal of apostates. Dan wielded the knife, later dubbing himself the prophet Elijah in a self-forged theology viewing Earth as Satan's domain. Christy Strack's obsession began innocently in 2004, when she dreamed of Dan Lafferty while reading the book. A devout but troubled Mormon, haunted by her first husband's infidelity and financial woes. She wrote him letters from Utah State Prison in Draper. What started as curiosity bloomed into a profound bond by 2005. She and Benjamin visited weekly. The maximal allowed, Dan treated Christy like a daughter, confiding his hell on earth philosophy. The world overrun by evil, salvation through radical faith. Letters flowed, hundreds per police discussing demons, prophecies, and escape from apocalypse. Benjamin joined the visits, drawn by shared addiction struggles.
Both had battled opioids.
Dan even willed his remains to them, seeing the couple as his spiritual heirs. I believe they're in paradise now. Dan later told the Associated Press in 2015, remorseful yet unrepentant about his influence. The Strack's faith twisted under the shadow friends, recalled Christy ranting about evil in the world, stockpiling food and guns for a pending apocalypse. They spoke of fleeing to an off-the-grid haven in Alaska or Missouri's polygamous compounds, but paranoia deep in Christy emailed family in 2013. The end is near. We must prepare. Benjamin, once jovial, withdrew, quitting jobs amid heroin relapses. Their marriage frayed. Christy confided romantic feelings for Dan to a relative, though Benjamin tolerated it. By summer 2014, isolation set in. They homeschooled the boys, limiting contact. Jansen, sensing tension, moved out temporarily. Police pieced it together in January 2015. The Stracks believed doomsday loomed, influenced by Lafferty's fatalism. No direct order from Dan. Contact ended in 2008 after their forgery and drug convictions revoked visits. But his ideas lingered like poison, Finlayson noted.
They saw the world as hell.
Death as mercy. Toxicology confirmed the drugs were stockpiled. The locked door suggested parental intent to shield the boys from revival attempts. Jansen, spared as the eldest, inherited survivor's guilt, later telling reporters they were good people lost in fear. The case exposed fissures in Utah's Mormon underbelly, fundamentalist fringes blending scripture with extremism, as in the Lafferty School of Prophets. Krakauer's book presciently warned of such revelations birthing violence. Dan, now 72 and frail, remains imprisoned. His cult, a handful of pen pals. Ron, on no Waits execution stalled by appeals. The Strack home sold quietly. Springville holds an annual vigil for the boys, ribbons tied to Zion Park's trees. In a state where faith is fabric, the Strack sent questions, revelations, razor edge, divine whisper, or deadly delusion. As Christy's cousin reflected, love twisted into terror. No one saw the fall coming. Jansen, now 30, honors them by living, married with kids, whispering, choose light over the dark.
Pier at dusk. In the spring of 2012, Danielle Harkins was a well-liked literacy teacher. At a St. Petersburg community center, colleagues described her as soft-spoken, devoted to her immigrant teens, and quietly battling a brutal divorce. By early June, however, friends noticed a change. Sleepless eyes, frantic talk of demons inside people, and late-night searches on exorcism forums. On Saturday, June 9, she texted 7 of her former students, ages 15 to 17, and asked them to meet her at a lonely stretch of beach just north of the St. Petersburg Pier. The teens, many of whom still saw her as a second mother, arrived expecting a bonfire and conversation. Instead, they found candles in the sand, printed chants, and a small fire already burning. Harkins spoke calmly at first. She told them everyone carried evil ticks that fed on pain and doubt. The only cure was to cut the skin so the demons could bleed out, then seal the wounds with fire so they could never return. She demonstrated by slicing her own forearm and holding a match to it. When the group hesitated, her voice grew urgent. "If we don't do this tonight, they'll never let you go." One boy extended his hand. The lighter kept blowing out in the Gulf breeze. Frustrated, Harkins poured perfume over his skin and tried again. The flame flared. The boy screamed as blisters rose. A second teen was told to cut a classmate's neck with a broken bottle. Just deep enough, she said, to release the darkness. Blood ran down the boy's shirt. Harkins heated a house key until it glowed and pressed it against the gash like a brand. The smell of scorched flesh mingled with salt air. 4 students were injured that night. The others stood frozen, bound by loyalty and fear. The ritual ended only when the fire burned low and the moon rose over the water. A friend who received a panic text the next morning called police. When officers arrived at Harkins' small rental house, she answered the door barefoot, eyes red from crying. It was cleansing, she repeated, but could not name any religion or tradition that required burning children. Investigators found no cult, no satanic Bible, just a lonely woman whose marriage had collapsed and whose mind had followed. Arrested on 7 counts of child abuse and aggravated battery, she pleaded no contest in December 2012. The judge sentenced her to 6 months in county jail, 5 years probation, mandatory mental health treatment, and a permanent ban from teaching or contacting minors. The teens, ashamed and protective of the teacher they once loved, refused to speak against her in open court. Only outside testimony forced the case forward. Released in 2018, Daniel Harkins disappeared from public view. The pier where it happened was demolished years later, replaced by a sleek new structure with bright lights and tourists. Yet old-timers still claim that on certain humid evenings, when the wind shifts just right, you can smell a faint trace of perfume and scorched skin drifting off the water.
In the spring of 1974, 24-year-old Japanese literature student Issei Sagawa followed a tall German classmate home in Tokyo. While she slept, he broke into her apartment intending to cut a piece of flesh from her body to eat. She woke up, fought back, and screamed. Police arrived and arrested him because he never admitted the cannibal motive, and because his wealthy father quickly settled with the victim, the case was quietly dropped. 7 years later, in June 1981, Sagawa was living in Paris studying French literature. He invited a 25-year-old Dutch classmate, René Hartveld, to his small apartment under the pretext of working on poetry translation. When she sat reading German verses into his tape recorder, he shot her once in the neck with a .22 rifle. For the next 2 days, he lived out his lifelong fantasy. He raped the corpse, then slowly dismembered and ate parts of her body. Thighs, breasts, lips. Taking photographs at every stage, he later wrote that the flesh melted in my mouth like raw tuna. On the 3rd day, he packed the remaining body parts into 2 suitcases and took a taxi to the Bois de Boulogne Park to sink them in the lake. Blood leaked onto the path. Passers-by called police. Sagawa was arrested on the spot. When officers searched his refrigerator, they found pieces of René still neatly arranged on plates. French psychiatrists declared him legally insane and dangerous, and he was committed indefinitely. However, in 1984, thanks to pressure from his influential family and the high cost of keeping a foreigner locked up, France deported him to Japan. sealing all case files. Once in Japan, local doctors examined him and pronounced him completely sane because France refused to send the trial documents. Japanese prosecutors had no legal evidence to charge him with murder. In 1986, less than 5 years after eating another human being, Issei Sagawa walked out of the mental hospital a free man. He immediately became a minor celebrity. He wrote best-selling books with titles like In the Fog, describing the murder and consumption in calm, elegant detail. He appeared on television talk shows, judged raw meat dishes on cooking programs, wrote restaurant reviews, and even acted in softcore films. In interviews, he casually remarked that human flesh was okay, but not as good Matsuzaika beef, and that now that he had fulfilled his dream, he no longer felt the urge. The Rolling Stones mentioned him in the 1983 song, Too Much Blood. He took her bones to the Bois de Boulogne. Over the decade, he published more than 20 books, gave hundreds of interviews, and lived off royalties and disability payments. René Hardevelt's family fought for decades to have him retried, but the French files remained sealed and still remain sealed. In his final years, Sagawa suffered several strokes, became wheelchair-bound, and lived quietly in a small apartment in Kawasaki City, cared for by his brother. He died of pneumonia on November 22 at the age of 73, never having spent a single day in prison for the murder and cannibalism he openly admitted. To this day, no one has ever explained why France refused to release the documents that would have allowed Japan to put him on trial. Issei Sagawa remains the only known cannibal in modern history who not only walked completely free, but turned his crime into a long and profitable career.
The Watchers in the Wires. The 2007 Washington Phone Stalker. In the quiet suburb of Fircrest, Washington, 3 ordinary families, the Kuykendalls, the Studers, and the Cowles, suddenly found themselves living inside a nightmare that began in the spring of 2007. It started with a phone call at 3:17 a.m. Courtney Kuykendall, 16, answered to hear a rasping male voice. "You're wearing the red hoodie right now. Tell your mom I'm gonna cut her throat while she sleeps." The line went dead. Courtney ran to her mother, Heather, who discovered the same caller had already left voicemails replaying a private conversation. The family had minutes earlier in their kitchen, while all their phones were sitting on the counter, powered off. Over the next 4 months, the harassment escalated into something that sounded impossible. The caller, or callers, knew which child was walking the dog and what color leash they used, when someone stepped into the shower and what song was playing on the radio. The exact words spoken during a closed-door meeting with Fircrest detective Larry Woolley. Even the brand of cereal someone poured at breakfast. Threats were graphic and personal. "I'm gonna gut your golden retriever in front of your little sister. Tell Grandma goodbye. She has 6 hours. Stop looking out the window, or I'll shoot you right now." Police quickly traced the calls. Every single one originated from the victim's own cell phones, even when the batteries had been removed. Tech experts from Verizon and the FBI confirmed the devices were being remotely activated and used as listening bugs. Text messages arrived with photos taken inside the home seconds earlier, including one of 14-year-old Brittany Studer asleep in bed, taken from inside her darkened bedroom. The families tried everything. New phones, new numbers, Faraday bags, turning phones off and locking them in the garage. The calls kept coming. One night, the Kuykendalls received a voicemail that was simply the sound of their own smoke alarm beeping, recorded from inside the house while every family member was out grocery shopping. Detective Woolley, a 20-year veteran, told ABC News in 2007, "I've seen stalking cases, I've seen harassment cases, but nothing like this. The level of access is terrifying." The FBI's Seattle cybercrime unit became involved, suspecting an advanced form of man-in-the-middle attack combined with malware that turned the phones into open microphones. Yet no suspect was ever identified. Rumors swirled. Some neighbors whispered the families were hoaxing for attention. Others pointed fingers at a disgruntled ex-boyfriend or a tech-savvy teenager with a grudge. A local private investigator hired by the Kuykendalls claimed the caller once patched him through to a payphone in Tacoma, only to hear his own heartbeat through the receiver, as if the stalker had been standing beside him moments earlier. Then, as suddenly as it began, the calls stopped in August 2007. The families received one final message, a calm female voice saying only, "It's over. You were fun." After that, silence. Years later, cybersecurity researchers believe the case was an early example of Issei 7 protocol exploitation, a vulnerability in global telephone networks that allows almost anyone with the right access to reroute calls, intercept texts, and turn any phone into a remote listening device. Capabilities that were largely unknown to the public in 2007. Similar stalkerware incidents have since been documented worldwide, but the Fircrest cases remain among the most invasive ever recorded. The families eventually moved away. Heather Kuykendall told reporters in 2010 that she still flinches when a phone rings after dark. "We were never safe in our own home." She said someone was always watching, always listening, and we never found out who or why. To this day, the case files remain open, labeled simply unknown, subject unknown, method unknown. Somewhere in the digital shadows, the watchers may still be out there.
Shadows in the rental. The Ammon's possession. In November 20th, London, LaToya Ammons, a 32-year-old single mother from Indianapolis, moved her 3 young children, 7-year-old daughter and 7 and 9-year-old sons, into a modest rental house at 30 on East Street in Gary, Indiana, with her mother Rosa Campbell helping out. The $20,000 a year home seemed like a fresh start after financial struggles. But within weeks, the family noticed oddities, swarms of black flies in winter, despite no open windows, mysterious boot prints in the dust, and faint guttural voices whispering from empty rooms. A devout Christian sprinkled bleach and ammonia to cleanse the space, but the air grew heavier. By March 2012, the disturbances escalated into outright terror. Ammon's 12-year-old daughter awoke one night, levitating above her bed, unconscious during a sleepover. The girl later described feeling choked by invisible hands, a voice hissing she'd never see her family again. The boys began speaking in deep demonic tones, their eyes rolling back as they growled threats like "get out." Ammons herself felt an oppressive weight, as if shadows pressed her down. One evening, the 9-year-old son hovered horizontally above the floor, his body rigid before crashing down. Desperate, the family invited clairvoyants from Indianapolis. After inspecting the basement, where Ammons claimed a shadowy man paced, they declared the house infested by 200 demons, including high-ranking entities like sergeants and lieutenants. They blessed the home with holy oil on doors and windows, reciting Psalm 91, but warned the family to leave immediately. Ammons couldn't afford to rent, was low, and she had no alternatives. The breaking point came on April 19, 2012. Campbell called 911 after the 9-year-old son fell into a trance, his voice turning guttural. "It's time." Paramedics arrived to find him unresponsive. His eyes blank at Methodist Hospital's emergency room. Chaos unfolded as nurses Valerie Washington and Maya Walker attended him. The boy suddenly grinned unnaturally and walked backward up the wall to the ceiling, hands still clasped in Campbell's, before flipping over and landing on his feet. Washington later wrote in her report, "I thought, is this the exorcist?" The boy then levitated briefly off the floor, snarling profanities at staff. DCS caseworker Melanie Gibson arrived for a welfare check and witnessed the 7-year-old son growl in a man's voice, warning, "You're going to die." Alarmed, Gibson invoked emergency custody, removing all 3 children to protective care. Psychologists evaluated them. The 7-year-old admitted to acting possessed. When questioned, his sister described choking sensations and threats of death within 20 minutes. Ammons and Campbell were deemed unstable, their claims dismissed as delusions, possibly Munchausen syndrome by proxy. But corroboration mounted. Gary Police Cap Charles Austin, a 36-year veteran and self-proclaimed skeptic, interviewed the family multiple times. He saw oily streaks on blinds that defied explanation and heard recordings of children's voices deepening unnaturally. A hospital chaplain blessed the boys who convulsed and spoke Latin phrases. Neither had learned. "I've seen a lot," Austin said, "but this was different. It shook me." Hammond sought help from St. Stephen Stone of Help Catholic Church. On April 22, Rev. Michael Maginot met her, listening to tales of hooded figures and levitating kids. Convinced of oppression, though not full possession, he petitioned Bishop Dale Melchek for approval. Rare in the Gary Diocese, none in 21 years, Maginot performed a minor exorcism on May 18, 2012, in English, as Ammons convulsed, her body arching unnaturally. 2 major rites followed, one in June with police guarding outside where she vomited and growled, the final in Latin where demons allegedly named themselves, Beelzebub among them, before fleeing as she slept peacefully. By November 21 and 12, Ammons regained custody. The family fled Gary, returning to Indianapolis. The demon house sat vacant until 2014, when Zach Bagans of Ghost Adventures bought and demolished it, citing overwhelming negativity. Skeptics like investigator Joe Nickel attributed to mass hysteria, sleep paralysis, or exaggeration. DCS psychologists noted the children acted deceptively to match their mother's fears. Yet official records, nearly 800 pages from DCS police and medical files, lend eerie credibility, corroborated by over a dozen witnesses. The saga inspired Netflix's 2024 film The Deliverance, starring Glenn Close as a demonic force haunting a black family. Though dramatized, it echoes Hammond's ordeal. Today, LaToya lives quietly, her faith unshaken. Don't assume it's not real, she told reporters. I've lived it in Gary's Rust Belt shadows. The question lingers, mass delusion or something darker stirring in the ordinary.
Warning. The following story is based on actual events. All
against character, and incidents are entirely accidental.